Hello, and welcome to the first installment of our Founders Day series, where we will be releasing new videos each week talking about the history of the Glencoe Mill Village and the founding of the Textile Heritage Museum. This week, we're going to be talking about the Holt family, early German immigrants to North America who would go on to become one of the most influential families in Alamance County history and found mills throughout the North Carolina Piedmont, including the Glencoe Mill Village where the Textile Heritage Museum resides today. We're filming today in the President's office here in the Glencoe Mill Village, where generations of Holt descendants presided over the comings and goings of the mill. The Holts first came to America in 1717, when Michael Holt, his mother, and stepfather left the Upper Rhine in Germany on a passenger ship. They came to Virginia as indentured servants and worked for the next 7 or 8 years under the Lieutenant Governor, Alexander Spotswood. While there, Michael, at the age of 21, married Elizabeth Scheible, and when their indenture was over, he received a land grant. In 1755, Michael and Elizabeth sold their Virginia properties and moved south to North Carolina, settling on Little Alamance Creek, southwest of what is now Burlington and Graham. Michael quickly became one of the area's most prosperous landholders, and this wealth would only continue to grow through later generations. Their son, Michael Holt II, continued using the family land to farm after his father's death in 1767, as well as becoming a justice of the peace and local militia leader. He was whipped by regulators protesting the state's frontier legal system during the Hillsborough court riots in September of 1770. And the Battle of Alamance, which ended the War of Regulation, was fought on farmland owned by the Holt family. Michael was also imprisoned as a suspected loyalist in Philadelphia during the American Revolution due to his position as a militia leader. Michael Holt III, born in 1778, was the third son of Michael II's second wife, Jane Lockhart. He would follow his father into politics, serving multiple terms in the North Carolina Congress, including the House of Representatives and the Senate. Michael Holt III continued to expand the family's land holdings and commercial enterprises, investing in stores, grist mills, blacksmithing, and similar businesses. He also became one of the North Carolina Piedmont's largest slaveholders. He married Rachel Rainey, and their son, Edwin Michael Holt, was born in 1807. Although Edwin Michael would continue the Holt's family involvement in agriculture, local business, and politics, he's most notable for being the first Holt descendant to enter into the textile industry. Inspired by the success of other cotton mills established in North Carolina during the first half of the 19th century, Edwin partnered with an uncle-in-law, William A. Kerrigan, to build a mill on Alamance Creek at the site of his father's grist mill. The Holt and Kerrigan Cotton Mill opened in 1837 and originally produced only yarn, but by 1849 the mill had expanded to include 12 looms, producing cloth worth 6 to 7 cents per yard. This cemented the Holt's family place in the new and growing textile industry of the American South. By 1860, Edwin was a part owner and director of both the Commercial National Bank in Charlotte and the North Carolina Railroad Company, as well as owning 1,600 acres of land in Alamance County, numerous businesses, and 51 enslaved individuals. These enslaved people were essential to the success and prosperity that the Holt family enjoyed in both agriculture and business. Edwin Holt and his wife, Emily Farish, married in 1828 and had 10 children, many of whom would join their father in the textile business. The eldest Holt child, Alfred Augustus, managed his father's general store in Graham until he died, likely of typhoid, at 28. In 1851, the second oldest son, Thomas Michael, returned from his Philadelphia business interests to help his father run what was, by 1860, called Alamance Cotton Mill. It was Thomas, along with the labor and expertise of enslaved brothers Sam and Caswell Jr., who would introduce indigo yarn dyeing techniques to the Holt mills and create the highly profitable Alamance plaids. After emancipation, Sam and Caswell took the last name Holt and became community leaders. Sam had begun preaching while he was still enslaved and went on to found both the Springdale Church in 1863 and the Springdale School for Freed Slaves in 1871. Caswell would go on to become Alamance County's first black sheriff's deputy and is remembered for his brave defiance of the KKK, testifying on Klan activity to the U.S. Senate despite being attacked several times and eventually being forced out of Alamance County. Thomas would also go on to become prominent in North Carolina politics, serving in both houses of the state legislature and eventually becoming governor of North Carolina post-Reconstruction. Younger sons James Henry, William Edwin, Lynn Banks, and Lawrence Shackelford would also enter the textile industry. The Holt daughters, Frances, Mary, and Emma, all made marriages to farmers from prominent families, who eventually joined the Holts in the textile business. Only Alexander, the black sheep of the Holt family due to his struggles with alcoholism and likely relationship with a servant named Minerva Andrews, would be largely excluded from the family's textile dynasty. During the American Civil War, the Holt family used its mills for both domestic and military production needs on behalf of the Confederacy. Brothers James, William, Alexander, and Lynn Banks all served in the Confederate Army, and although James and William saw little action, Alexander and Lynn Banks would be involved in some of the heaviest fighting of the Civil War, and both spent time as prisoners of war. Of the 10 or so cotton mills operating on the Haw River by the 1880s, 4 were founded by E.M. Holt and his children, and 2 others, Saxpahaw Cotton Factory and Granite Cotton Mill, were purchased from competing families later. The 2 youngest Holt brothers, Lynn Banks and Lawrence Shackelford, built Belmont Mill near Graham in 1879 and the E.M. Holt Plaid Mill in 1883 in Burlington. In 1909, Banks consolidated the Alamance, Belmont, Oneida, and Carolina mills into the L. Banks Holt Manufacturing Company, as well as buying mills in Gibsonville and Kings Mountain. Middle sons William and James founded the Carolina Cotton Mill, and by 1880 had begun construction on Glencoe Mill, 2 miles upstream. William would later become involved in the founding of at least 7 more mills spanning from Gibsonville to Asheville. When he died in 1917, his estate was valued at approximately $3 million, and his heirs paid the highest inheritance tax that had been paid in North Carolina at that time. It was James Henry and his sons, however, who would eventually carry on the Holt textile legacy in Alamance County. In the early 1890s, his son James Jr. and Robert built Windsor Cotton Mill, while Samuel and William constructed Lakeside Mills, both in Burlington. James Henry's son Robert eventually became the manager of Carolina Mill and almost the sole owner of Glencoe Cotton Mill. Robert experienced tragedy early in his life when his fiancée, for whom he had built a home, died unexpectedly shortly before their wedding day, and he never married afterwards. He did, however, dote on his youngest and only surviving sister, Daisy. After his death in 1923, Robert left Glencoe Mill to Daisy, and her husband, Walter Green Sr., managed the operation for a number of years with their son, James Holt Green. Although James Holt Green, who went by his middle name of Holt, had been preparing to take over management of Glencoe Mill, the Green family's plans changed when the United States entered World War II. James Holt enlisted as a naval intelligence officer and was serving in Slovakia when he was captured by German forces, taken to Mauthausen concentration camp near Linz, Austria, and executed in January of 1945. After the deaths of Walter Sr. and James, Glencoe Mills continued producing cotton under the family's second son, Walter Green Jr., until the mill closed its doors in 1954, succumbing to increased competition from U.S. and foreign cotton manufacturing and the growth of the synthetic fabric industry. Today, the Holt family name can be found all over North Carolina, especially in Alamance County, due in large part to the family's role in bringing the textile industry to the Piedmont. The family's generation-long involvement in politics, industry, and agriculture certainly left a mark on the history of North Carolina, but the Holt family legacy is also complicated by their participation in slavery and the economic inequalities of industrialization. The Textile Heritage Museum is dedicated to preserving this legacy as part of the South's rich textile history. So give us a like and a follow if you're interested in learning more, or visit us in person if you're interested in seeing the President's office for yourself.